I'm dreaming of a white PC! I don't dare sing the tune because of copyright. Today we're going to be building ourselves an absolutely jaw-droppingly beautiful gaming PC with a white theme. We've got an RTX 4080 B650 Ryzen CPU, and my word is it going to be handle the next generation gameplay with ray tracing like you've never seen before. Oh, and don't forget about stupendously high frame rates in the multiplayer titles. They're actually going to play at 1440p and 4K. A massive thank you to Gigabyte for actually sponsoring this video. Let's get started. And let's get started by actually showing you my hands. That's right, we have an overhead camera. You guys have been asking for this for years, and there it is. It only cost me a few £1,000s. And the case that we're using here today is pretty much the best of NZXT, and it does come in a couple of versions. This is their H7, so this is very large. It's pretty much geared towards a high-end build like this. They have also recently released the H5 that is similar to this, but slightly smaller if you're wanting something a bit more affordable or, you know, smaller, lighter. This is the Elite version of the H7, which is why it comes with this tempered glass panel on the front, but of course you can get this with mesh if you prefer to go down that route for better airflow. I don't think it's going to make too much difference for this build, but please do bear this in mind. The only other thing to note though is that you get 3 RGB fans on the front and an RGB controller with the Elite, whereas you don't get that on the standard airflow version. So again, bear this in mind. I suppose I probably should show you the airflow that you do get on the Elite version, which is this fairly large cutout here on the side. I think it's a shame that they don't give it to you on both, because then that would actually give you much better airflow, because at the moment you're relying purely on that. I understand why some people aren't going to want to go down this route, but as we're going to be showing you thermals and performance later, you can be the judge for yourself whether it actually matters to the rig that you're going to be building. But otherwise, we are going for quite a high-end build here today. This is the RTX 4080, and this is a very interesting graphics card, because personally speaking, I think it's going to be very difficult to pick between something like this and the RX 7700X, because the pricing is going to be changing all of the time. I was very open about the price when this launched, because I do think, especially in the UK, that the asking price was just too much. But we have already started to see this come down a little bit, and bearing in mind AMD has now shown their hand, I think the pricing is going to sort of normalize as the two of them do start to have these little pricing wars. This is pretty much the better rounded card, especially if you are going to do ray tracing, whereas the AMD equivalent to this, the RX 7900XTX, is actually going to slightly outperform this in certain titles, especially standard rasterized multiplayer, things like that, but then you lose features like DLSS. As we've said, the ray tracing just isn't as good, and as there is going to be a big pricing war at the moment between AMD and Nvidia, I think which one's going to be better for you is going to vary depending on when you're actually watching this video, and of course when you're actually buying all of the parts to build this. So I wouldn't say one is necessarily better than the other. I think personally speaking, at the time of filming, I'd rather have the 4080, but if it's £200 less for the 7900XTX, that's personally what I would buy, but it's going to be changing all of the time. Do what's best for you. The exact version that we have here is the Gaming OC from Gigabyte. I love these cards because they're very good in terms of performance. They're usually pretty quiet cards, but they don't cost an absolute arm and a leg. You can get things like the Aorus Master that is obviously a brilliant card, but because it costs more money, I think the value here is going to be better, and a lot of people want to go down this route rather than going for like the top end that not everyone's going to properly be able to utilize and appreciate. But of course, we'll be unboxing this a little bit later in the video, but now we can actually go for team overhead. Here we go, look, this is the motherboard. This is the B650 Aorus Elite, and this is a brilliant value option because B650 is clearly going to be better for bang for the buck when it comes for a gaming PC. Yes, you're going to lose out on certain features, but to be honest, most people aren't going to need them anyway. I mean, when AMD actually announced these, they were bigging up PCI Generation 5 storage, yet we haven't actually seen that materialize. And in most games, it's not really going to make any difference at all. I think in the future it might, but until we have widespread adoption of things like Unreal 5 and the direct storage API, I really wouldn't be too fussed about it at all. But in case you're new to the channel, new joke, and you're not that familiar with your way around a motherboard, the main things you need to know is that this is where the CPU will go. This is the CPU socket. Here you have your RAM slots. This is DDR5 because this is a brand new Ryzen board. You want to use slots 2 and slots 4. Don't put them directly next to each other unless you're using 4 sticks and populating all of them. Here is where you put your M.2 SSD. You'll notice we have these heat sinks on there because they do generate quite a lot of heat. Underneath it is a PCI X16 slot. This is where our graphics card is going to fit in. Below this, we've got more storage, and then below that, we have more PCIe slots, but these aren't going to be rated for the full speed. You're going to put things like capture cards in here, maybe extra like USB, Wi-Fi, anything really like that. Of course, you're going to need to plug this into your power supply, so we have these little power connections up here at the top left and the top right. Then below this, we've got some SATA ports if you're using some old 2.5-inch hard drives or SSDs. USB 3 here, USB-C, fan headers. Down the bottom here is where you plug into your case, so this is what makes the power button actually do anything, and if for some reason it doesn't work, this is usually going to be the source of your problem. Just make sure you've plugged it in properly down here. More fan headers, USB 2.0, these are going to be useful probably for this case, because you're going to be able to control all of your lighting with the motherboard rather than just using buttons on that. But if you're using any sort of special pumps or anything, they usually have a USB 2.0 header. And then all the way to the left here, you've got 3 more connections. These 2 are your RGB, you've got addressable and 4-pin, and then this is your front panel connection to actually get the audio to work. So if you're going to use an analog headset, plug in headphones and you want this to do anything, that's a connection that you need to plug in. So there you go. Hopefully that gave you a new perspective on things, but it is now time to actually press on to our Ryzen CPU. This is the 7700X, which is a very good pairing for a 4080. I think if you can step up to a 7900X, it is going to give you a little bit more of an edge in 1440p gaming, but if you're doing something like, I don't know, 1440p ultra wide or 4K, then this should do very, very well indeed. But I would imagine that you'll probably be upgrading this in a year or so when the new one comes out, because you do need a little bit extra performance in CPU-bound titles, and even the top-end Ryzen CPU still will hold this whole system back in some scenarios. Not most, but definitely at lower resolutions or really high CPU-bound titles with things like Spider-Man and ray tracing enabled, for instance. So let us take this out of the box. It's really simple. Just open up this top slot, being careful not to touch any of these pins or it is game over, and then you just gently line this uplet. No force required. Lower it back down, hold it in place, and then the cover should just come off and you can save this for later on. I mean, you're not going to use it, just don't waste it. If you send your motherboard back, you're going to need it. Then we can press on to the memory, or the RAM, and this is Trident Z5. It's running at 5600 megahertz, and I did a very interesting video that you should be able to find in the top right corner of your screen. And obviously, I don't want to spoil it, but the results were interesting to say the least, because while faster RAM definitely can make a difference, it's such an extreme circumstance where it will, and the differences aren't huge anyway, that I'd say 5600 or 6000 is going to be the sweet spot. But as I say, getting an Expo kit to ensure better compatibility for RAM overclocking is going to make sense if you can do that. But you just line this up with the slots, push it home until it clicks. Again, remembering to use slots 2 and slots 4 and not putting them directly next to each other. Then of course we're going to need some storage, and again, I'm pretty brand agnostic at this stage. I think that's the right word. I was never good at English. I mean, I was okay, I got B. This is from Lexar, this is the NM800, and as a baseline SSD, this is a very good point of entry because you're getting super fast read speeds, but it's not quite so fast on the writes. And if you can save money doing that for a gaming PC, it does make a lot of sense. As we've said time and time again, there's always some offer on something. So I wouldn't necessarily go for the exact one I've got here, because if you can get one from like Samsung, from Aorus, from anyone really that's on offer, and it is going to give you better value, then that's going to make the largest amount of sense. But I think at this stage, just grab one that's going to give you the best value and is PCI Gen 4 if you can afford the extra cash. But if you're going for a 4080 Ryzen new rig, then chances are it's probably on your radar. Installing it is very simple. You've got this quick release, so it just goes into this top slot, then just replace the heatsink and screw it back into place. At this stage then, we are pretty much ready to actually get this inside our rig. But before we do so, it's always worth checking the CPU cooler and assessing whether it needs like a back plate to go on or anything like that, because it's easier to do it now. And if you are using an air cooler, I'd always recommend putting that on while the motherboard's on the box as well. Again, it's just a lot easier to build on the box than when it's actually inside our case. And because we've got a white enclosure, we're going for a white cooler, and I haven't actually used this one yet. I've used a similar black variant, but not the white. This is from NZXT. They sent this out along with the case, and you can see it is fully white. This is the X53. You can grab a Z variant of this that does actually have a display on it that shows you real-time readouts, but you actually end up paying like 80 to 100 quid more for that. So great if you want it, but not going to make any difference for outright performance. We also have more white RGB fans, but then here's the thing that I'm actually looking for are AMD mounting hardware. Get this little ring and these AM4 screws. We will then remove the default AM5 mounting hardware, but keep the back plate. Grab these, throw the little screws everywhere, then you just gently put them in the holes and screw down. And then once the motherboard is actually inside the rig, we will get our AMD plate, attach it to the pump head, and then the whole thing will lower down on top of our CPU, The pump head sort of protrudes a little bit, so it will be touching the CPU, and then we'll screw it in place and the whole thing will be safe and secure. But obviously we don't want to attach this until it's in the rig. And I like the fact that this case is mostly toolless actually, which isn't what could be said for the Fractal Ridge that I reviewed last week. Find that video in the top right corner of your screen. Otherwise that was actually a very good chassis. It's just too many screws. Oh, and this should show you the inside of the case a lot better. I love that there's so much cable management here. And as I've said, this Elite version comes with this RGB controller, which is great if you do want to expand with more NZXT fans and hook this up directly to your motherboard. All of the screws and things you'll need will be in this bottom box. But for now, we will put our case down flat, pick up our motherboard and gently line this up with the slot. Open up the box, and classic NZXT, they haven't actually labeled what all of the screws are for, which I think is so silly. Just write motherboard on them because you never quite work it out. I think it's these ones, but I always choose the wrong screws. That looks too small to me. Oh, just read the instructions. Look, I get it, but a lot of people won't read the instructions and they're doing me. Why not just cut out the middleman and label the bag? Try that again, screwing in here, 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 and here. Isn't it nice to actually be able to see what I'm doing today? Stand it back up, grab the RGB fans, then carefully lay it back down. Repeat with the other fan, then use the long screws to gently screw the whole thing into place so that it is safe and secure. We also need to get the RGB hooked up by connecting these little small ones, so you've got an in and an out. Now it's time to actually fit this for real. Is there a little radiator bracket at the top? Some cases it can actually be removed, but if you look at the top here, you're essentially wanting to fit this on here, or at least through here. Be very careful not to scratch the glass. I can show you this, making sure it's the right way. One washer and one screw. Then you can just guide it into the position that you want and fix it home till it's safe and secure. Radiator is in then, which means the very last thing to do is to remove this little cap, undo, I think it's an Azatec design actually, their little plate mechanism. Attach the AMD one on, although because it's a circle, sometimes you don't line it up properly, but there we go. And then just line it up with the socket, remembering that if you've bought a used cooler or you've used it before, you will need to add some thermal paste, but this one is brand new, so it just goes over the hole. And then in the box, you also get these very large thumb screws that you just screw on. Just use a screwdriver to get it nice and safe and secure. And there's your cooler installed. I'm also going to swap out this back fan for another one of their white RGB ones, just to complete the look and make it look a lot neater. Obviously you don't have to do this, but it'll make it look better. It's just 4 screws and it really is very simple, but I would have got a 140 if I'd known, because I've swapped a 140 for a 120 here, which is going to make it slightly louder, but it's only a case exhaust fan, so it doesn't really matter. Then we can turn it around and start plugging everything in. Our radiator fans plug into the motherboard. Here we have the RGB connection that plugs into the fans. And then we also have this little dummy cable that will be used for the CPU fan speed, so it actually sends a signal to the pump. Around the side we also have a load more cables. We've got this front panel connection for the power reset. Then we have our USB 3 and our USB Type-C. Oh, and also our HD audio and a USB. The full shebang today. The USB-C plugs in here. Just below it is the USB 3. Front panel connects down the bottom here. Then we've got our USB 2.0 and finally our HD audio all the way at the bottom left. And how silly of me, we've also got one more USB for the pump itself. With that plugged in and connected, it's then time to move on to the power supply. And this is actually a brand new one from Cooler Master. It is fully modular, 750 watts. I'd probably go for 850 just for a little bit extra security. This is fine, but I always go for a little bit more than the recommended. But the reason we're using this is because it has this brand new PCI Gen 5 connector, rather than having to rely on the adapter that comes with the NVIDIA cards. So we have one cable that do all the power, which will make the whole rig look a lot better. We need to plug in 2 connections for the CPU, our absolutely ginormous ATX connection, and then last but certainly not least, our big, thick, chungus, probably not the most attractive cable in the world, 12 or 16 pin power connection. This one is rated for 300 watts. Well, that's no good, is it? I didn't know that. You only tell me this now. Looks like we're using the adapter then. And this is why you watch PC Centric cock it up, rather than doing it yourself and cocking up. Anyway, we'll grab our PSU, fan facing downwards, drop it in this back chamber, fix it down with the screws that come with the case, grab the two that say CPU and tuck them up here at the top. The large ATX connection can feed through the side. Oh, and then finally, what you want to do, just to make your life slightly easier, is drag these PCIe connections through this bottom chamber here. I love cases that do this. I don't understand why they don't all do it, because it means that the cables go directly to your graphics card and they look a lot prettier than sort of dragging them over. But these cables can now be plugged in. You can't miss them because they're very, very obvious. Some people do forget the CPU at the top though, which would be pretty bad because your PC wouldn't turn on. And with pretty much everything else done, there's only one thing left to do, which is to actually open up our RTX 4080, which is easily going to be the most exciting bit. And I remember the first time I got my GPU, I was just reading the box over and over again. It wasn't particularly interesting, but it's like, this thing's gonna play games. What was it? Battlefield 3, I think, when I first got into PC gaming. And look at the size of this card. I didn't actually expect it to be quite as big as the Master. It probably is slightly smaller. Who needs B-roll when you've got an overhead camera? Look at that. You can see at the top, it says GeForce RTX. You've got this very large cutout here, so you get brilliant airflow. You've got a BIOS switch between overclock and silent. What have we got for I/O? Let's take these little plastic covers out. We have 3 display ports and 1 HDMI. But you can see this is definitely a very attractive card. I imagine it'll have some RGB. Should we do a peel? Oh, that was actually not bad. That was actually not bad. If you're doing a comparison with the Master, by the way, you can see that the Master is actually a bit bigger. Both are going to be very, very good for cooling, but of course this is a 4090, this is a 4080. Hopefully the final thing to do then is to remove these slot covers. Pick up our card and gently do one more peel apparently, and line it up with our slot, pushing it home before securing it into place. And it fits in here very nicely, doesn't it? There we go, our adapter has been connected. Let's get it plugged into the card itself. Make sure it clicks in, give it a good old push here. Tidy everything else up with basically no cable management at all around the back. Barely anything to do really. Well, a little bit. We can just stuff these cables in here actually. Use some of the straps, just like that. And already 10 times better. Side panel should have no problem going on. There we go, look. Final peel. Let's get this thing plugged in. We've grabbed our keyboard, mouse, and of course, most importantly, the brand new PC Centric mouse mat. And if you want to get your hands on one as soon as possible, Wave 1 ends on December 31st. So order now, and you can get this lovely thing on your desk. I mean, just look at this thing. Who wouldn't want this on your desk? Gaming grade. I mean, that is just marketing. It's great for gaming. The surface is smooth. Let's hook up our display, give ourselves some power, and just hope it works. Oh, that is bright. I love the white. White on white PCs are amazing. I think we do need to tune the fans a bit, but worry not, that is very easy to rectify. Ryzen boards do take a little bit longer on their first boot to actually show up, so I wouldn't be worried if it takes a minute. As long as all the lights go out and we get one big light on here, we're all good. Oh! Yes! Never gets old. I've never had a PC sound so aggressive on first turn on. But there we go. Boom, we're in. My PCs are very aptly named after the SSD they're on. But of course, if you're not a PC building YouTuber, then chances are you've got a blank SSD. Grab a copy of Windows 11, download the ISO from the Microsoft website for free. Then you can just go through all of the setup and it's very, very simple and you'll get to a very similar screen. Obviously you have to buy a license key eventually, but you don't actually need it to get it all set up in the first instance. Let's play the games. We made it! We're here! We're ready to get gaming. And right off the bat, I will say just how good looking this system is. I mean, just bask in the gorgeousness of the machine. I think it's beautiful. If you are going to go for a white rig, it doesn't always work out having like a black motherboard and black components within a white chassis, but here it really does. I think the cooler really does finish this off, I suppose. It almost brings the white into the PC with the white RAM and everything just seems to match. I'm really happy with how this has turned out actually. Even the cable adapter doesn't look too bad, where you've got all of the PCI cables coming down from the bottom. Really well thought out and I'm very happy. But let's play some games. Now the first game to actually look at is this, which is Portal RTX, and I apologise if there is something wrong with the recording. This is a very old game, but has obviously been remixed and it doesn't really like to be recorded while all of this is going on. But we're actually running this with DLSS 3.0 at the moment, which means we have super resolution and we also have their new frame generation technique. The downside is that there is more latency, and you can feel that this isn't actually quite as smooth as the 78 frames a second would suggest, but bear in mind this is full path tracing, proper ray tracing, but still running 4K resolution with DLSS, and you're getting that higher frame rate. That is pretty much what this next gen is all about. Whether this is actually worth it is entirely up to you, because if you go for an AMD card, you're not going to be able to run this at anywhere close to the same level of fidelity and frame rate. I think it's going to be an interesting space to sort of see what happens with their cards as time goes on, but there's no doubt about it that if you do want to play ray trace titles, then clearly the Nvidia cards are going to be the way to go at the moment. I've now turned it down to 1440p, and you can really start to see what RTX is all about now. I mean, look at the light refracting off of the glass, the way you get all of this distortion and just how it looks super realistic. As we walk through the portal as well, you can see that this is rendered in such great detail when it comes to the lighting. It is remarkable. It's a bit weird, bear in mind that the rest of the assets don't really live up to the same sort of level, if you like, but it's still a really cool tech demo. I wouldn't say it's that much more than that. You can play the full game like this and you're gonna love it, but obviously it's not exactly a 30, 40, 50 hour experience now, is it? The next two titles, though, very much are that. Both developed by CD Projekt Red. We have The Witcher 3 remastered in ray tracing glory, and of course everybody's favourite, some Cyberpunk 2077. And what you're seeing here is the most up-to-date version of the game. We've got Ray Tracing Ultra, but it's a bit annoying because at the time of filming they still haven't actually released the DLSS 3.0 update. That's a bit confusing because I've been using like the Nvidia press code that they gave out, and I just assumed that it would be available to everyone like very soon, but it hasn't come out yet, which is very strange. So for that reason, we're not going to be using DLSS 3.0 because I think that's cheating. If you buy one of these cards today, well, at the moment, maybe this changed by the time the video comes out, you won't be able to use DLSS 3. So we use the Ray Tracing Ultra preset, and we set DLSS to automatic. And here we are in the game, and bearing in mind this is not the flagship 4090, we're not running DLSS 3.0, I still think that frame rate is very impressive, around about 60 to 75 FPS in what is a very demanding area of the game, running at 4K resolution. But this is an absolutely beautiful game, and it is one I would highly recommend exploring in Ray Tracing RTX, because it does add that extra layer on top. And if you do want a higher frame rate, you can turn some of the ray tracing settings down, and you're still going to get a really next-gen experience, but with a slightly higher frame rate. I have to say though, something here is actually a little bit strange, because we've now turned it down to 1440p. I'll make sure we are recording, which we definitely are, and I've turned ray tracing off, but as you can clearly see, we're hitting some sort of weird bottleneck at the moment, where we're not fully utilising our GPU. And this isn't something I think I've really seen in Cyberpunk before. I know ray tracing is very demanding as we turn this back on, but even the 7700X, I would assume, wouldn't bottleneck in this exact situation. So it's strange that we are seeing this. It's almost as if 4K and 1440p have the exact same frame rates. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the 7700X is not what you want for a 4080. This was one of those scenarios I was talking about where you might not be able to have your cake and eat it because you need a more expensive CPU. But it's very strange, isn't it, that even the latest 7700X isn't quite enough to run Cyberpunk with ray tracing with a 4080. Very interesting. It's demanding, but that's not actually what I expected to see. Hello, how's it going?
Sorry. It's fine. I have to break the horrific news to you. There's no panettone.
No panettone? What are we going to do for Christmas?
They've got Pandoro.
No, don't get Panadoro. No. We'll buy the panettone somewhere else.
No.
I'm going to put this in the video now.
No.
That's going in the video.
No.
Let's press on to game number 3 now, and one I haven't actually played yet, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt Ray Traced Edition. Here are all of our extra options. Look, you've got ray tracing, we'll leave all of these on, DLSS, FSR, blur, all of these usual things. Hairworks I'm going to leave off, and then we've got Ultra Plus for all of these settings, and we're running this at 4K with frame generation on. So let us hit continue and see if we can notice a difference. Is it going to blow us away? Oh, got a little bit of stutter there. No, we're in, and here we go. Oh, stutter, are we there? I think we're there. We've loaded in. There we go. So this does look pretty tasty. Oh no, a little bit of stutter. I've heard the performance of this is a bit funny at the moment. There's just been a hot fix, but that's not great. I hope it doesn't keep doing that. We're currently getting around about 102 FPS with about 50 milliseconds of latency, which is good to me. Weird artifact on the shadow there. I think this isn't quite done. Oh, here we go. Well, we're back and I'm being attacked, but yeah, the frame rate is all over the place. This is some sort of weird optimization issue. I mean, look at that. That is not good. I mean, if our frame rate was actually 100 FPS, then that obviously would be very good, but it's just not, is it? And I've died. We'll try this again, but with DLSS frame generation off, and we'll see if we get any more stutters. The frame rate is still actually pretty high at around about 70 FPS. It's not stuttered just yet, which is good. So maybe the frame generation is actually causing us some issues, because suddenly this feels a lot more playable. That is a very gorgeous game, isn't it? I think the reflections are still slightly lower resolution than I would like, but I'm being very nitpicky here. Next game! Our next title, some of you guys might be quite familiar with, some Overwatch 2, and this is obviously a little bit easier to run, but this is still running at the Ultra preset, AMD FSR, but at 4K, and you can see we're getting around about 175 to 200 or so FPS. The game looks absolutely fantastic, but I'd wager that anyone playing properly competitive wouldn't be playing this at 4K, probably 1440p. So if we turn this down to around about 66% or so to properly replicate 1440p, you'll then see that our frame rate will skyrocket to around about 212, 250 FPS or so. It is going to depend, of course, where you are actually in the game, but this is definitely worth grabbing like a 360Hz 1440p monitor, playing it at high and trying to get as close as possible. It's obviously going to depend how serious you are, but there's no doubt about it that a card like this is definitely geared towards competitive play, and you shouldn't have too much of an issue like getting not 360 FPS, but getting over 200 FPS, 1440p, very, very doable. We're pressed swiftly on to some Call of Duty Warzone, but I realise I need to do some thorough testing, which means putting our side panel on so you can assess thermals and temperatures. I doubt there's going to be anything to worry about, but it is worth bearing in mind that the new Ryzen CPUs do tend to run between 90 and 95 out of choice to maintain the highest clock speeds possible, which actually means tuning your system is pretty annoying because you have to get a fan curve that can sort of go ballistic at 96 degrees but then stay quiet when it's between 90 and 95. It's a pain. Oh no, I ruined it. Can I try that again? Smooth operator me. And then it's time to jump out of the plane at 4K DLSS, and you can see we're getting around about 127, 130 FPS. This does usually improve once we land, so let's do just that. And actually it stays about the same, around about 125, 130 FPS. So what I'm using now is a 4K 120 monitor, so this is clearly a perfect pairing for this. I think if it was up to me, I'd still recommend that most people go for an ultra-wide, like a 1440p ultra-wide. 3440 by 1440 is the sweet spot, I think, for PC gaming and when it comes to me. But if you're watching a lot of movies or TV, then I think getting a 16:9 does make a lot more sense, as you're going to probably be able to feel the frame. But there's no doubt about it that this is a very good looking game, and Warzone runs absolutely brilliantly on this NVIDIA card. We've now turned this down to 1440p, and you can see our frame rate is slightly higher, around about 130 to 150, but I think we're just creeping into the realm of bottlenecking now from that 7700X. So if it was me playing exclusively for Warzone, I'd probably look at getting a 7900 XTX, get a slightly more expensive CPU with that money, and I think your overall frame rate would be slightly higher. But as we mentioned at the start of the video, pricing is very much all over the place, so depending on when you actually check out and buy your graphics card, it could change. I wouldn't say that one is necessarily better than the other than clear win for NVIDIA when it comes to ray tracing, but at the cost of literal cost. Here's your noise test, by the way. Basically silent. The Gigabyte card does a very, very good job of keeping temperatures under check, even in this chassis. Around about 51 degrees, barely making any noise. So then, this has been one of the most attractive systems I've built in a long, long time, especially when it comes to a black and white theme. I think this looks awesome. Obviously, it's not going to appeal to everyone. I know that you will get better thermals if you take this front panel off and you go for the airflow version. If you want to do that, then just do that. But if you are after a more attractive glass chassis, I think this is a solid option, even with the super high-end components. Things I would change if you're spending a bit more money, probably go for the 360 at the top as you get quieter CPU operation. I don't think the thermals would change because of that dynamic clocks, but it's worth considering if you have a little bit extra money. Probably upgrade that CPU, or as we've discussed, you could get the cheaper AMD graphics card in the same Gigabyte variant or one of their other ones, and that would save you a little bit of money. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you like? What do you dislike? What would you do differently? And of course, as always, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything featured, maybe even grab yourself the PC Centric mouse mat, you can find that all listed down below. But thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button, get yourself subscribed, and I'll catch you in the next one.